Hi, everyone. I'm Professor Bill Plevan, teaching the Ethical Perspectives in Human Rights class at Gratz College. It's good to be with you. This is a short video introduction to the reading for week one. I'll cover a few points that are laid out a little bit in the beginning of the lecture notes for week one, but I won't go into all of the detail that's there. The concept of human rights really enters the lexicon in the modern period, as I say in the introduction. But it has roots. The notion of human rights, or some of the key notions of human rights, go back to ancient sources in philosophy, as well as, I should say, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, and even later in the Quran. We're going to be focusing, especially in this class, in the Western philosophical tradition, with some mention of other religious traditions later on. But it gives us a sense that even if the term human rights, in the specific sense in which we think about human rights, has developed in the modern period, especially in the 20th century, some of the key ideas go back much further and have had an important influence in shaping later modern thought and thinking about human rights. There's a really key break in the modern period in thinking about rights. And so this week we're focusing on ancient medieval and late medieval or early modern, depends on how you categorize the 17th century, where Hugo Grotius is writing. But basically we're looking at the kind of the span of the ancient period to the beginning of the modern period in this week. And next time we'll look at the modern thinkers who really dramatically change the way we think about the way the West thought about rights. The key things I want to draw attention to, especially in terms of the way in which there's some continuity but also some difference. The two key things I want to draw your attention to is the way that these ancient thinkers in particular think about justice, and that is that they focus, especially Plato and Aristotle, focus on justice as an intrinsic good. You see this in Cicero also. The justice as an intrinsic good, and really what they're looking for is how to define justice as a virtue or as some intrinsic good, which then they relate to law, but they're not really starting from the standpoint necessarily of talking about, well, what makes a just law just. They want to first define what justice is as a virtue, and its role in human nature. And that's the second thing I'm going to come to in a second. But understanding that they're looking at justice as a virtue as something that's an intrinsic good, and then moving to talking about the laws of the state, which then they ultimately do. That's a little bit different than maybe the way we talk about justice and law today. But in a sense, it's very important in terms of the way we think about human rights, because underneath the concept of human rights is the notion that all human beings have some basic dignity. So the way they thought about it might be a little bit different, and that's something that'll be important and helpful for you to think about and really edifying in terms of what this course brings to us. The second thing is this term nature. And the ancients really use the term nature in a very different way. You start to see a shift with Grotius, but even still, he's very beholden to the Aristotelian concept. We're used to thinking of nature as something that is simply not human artifice, that's from the natural world. And natural law, or the laws of nature, is really our phrase today, right? The laws of nature are thought of today as being more mechanistic and having nothing to do with human good, right? The laws of nature just kind of happen, whether they're good for us, whether the things that are happening in nature are good for us or not. It's not how the ancients looked at it at all. The nature of something, and this is particularly true in the Aristotelian picture, the nature of something includes the concept of its good or its fulfillment. The Greek term for that is the telos, or the end of something. The end meaning not the final, not its finality, but its completion, its fulfillment, its perfection. So all human beings, like all creatures, according to Aristotle, have a telos, an end, a thing that they're meant to be, to reach their potential. In order for human beings to reach their potential, they have to have the conditions under which they can flourish. Some of those are obviously material conditions. They have to have enough material resources and nutrition and etc. In order to flourish. But they also need to live in a certain kind of society. And so for Aristotle and for his successors, justice becomes a matter of providing the social and political conditions in which human beings can flourish. And justice as a virtue is really about balancing the needs of different human beings so that all human beings can flourish, or at least in Aristotle's conception, it might just be all the people in that particular polis, in that particular city state. But as I note in the lecture notes, under Cicero, that conception becomes much more universal. But really, they're using this very, very different conception of nature. So when we're reading Thomas Aquinas, for example, and when he talks about natural law, it's important to pay attention to that. And there is some shift with Grotius, so it's worth looking and understanding what that shift is. And to this very day, people do talk about natural right, and they mean something similar, though they've, for the most part, dropped. For the most part today, philosophers have dropped Aristotle's teleological picture. But maybe some have kept it in, but people will still use the term natural right to mean a conception of right or a conception of justice that transcends any particular political system. And that's a kind of a legacy of that kind of Aristotelian thinking that is still a part of the way we think about justice today. So I look forward to reading and discussing it online with you, and enjoy the reading and have a good week.